Welcome to the Sermon Podcast for First St. Charles United Methodist Church in downtown St. Charles, Missouri. We are so glad that you're here, and it's our prayer that you feel safe, welcome, and wanted in this space. If you're interested in finding out more about us or supporting our ministries, you can connect with us online at firststcharlesumc.org.
Today's scripture comes from the book of Romans, chapter 12, with three different translations. From the NRSVUE, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, on the basis of God's mercy, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable act of worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. From the J.B. Phillips translation, with eyes wide open to the mercies of God, I beg you, my brothers, as an act of intelligent worship, to give him your bodies as a living sacrifice, consecrated to him and acceptable by him. Do not let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from within, so that you may prove in practice that the plan of God for you is good, meets all his demands, and moves towards the goal of true maturity. And from the Message translation, so here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. In these living words, we are becoming disciples of Christ.
God and evolution, it seems, have creatively conspired. So we see the magnificent Arctic fox changing costume with the weather. In winter, they don a bright white or bluish gray coat to blend into the snow covering the inland areas of the Arctic. When the snow melts and the rocks and plants of the tundra are revealed, their coat changes to a brown or a gray. As the name suggests, the mimic octopus changes shape and color to resemble other marine animals like the flatfish, lionfish, seahorse, and crabs. They do this as a defensive tactic to avoid potential predation. In the summer, the American goldfinch sports a luminous yellow feather, making it a win for bird watchers. But as the weather cools and winter rolls in, the goldfinch dons some really subtle brown feathers. One of the truly amazing experiences Beth and I had on a vacation to California was a trip to the Monterey Bay Aquarium. As I watched cuttlefish for hours, it was fascinating as they mimicked their background environment, changing color and pattern, even the texture of their skin. It was a symphony of painted and repainting perfection. And of course, there are the chameleons that are ectothermic, meaning that they change color to regulate their body temperatures, either to a darker color to absorb light and heat, or to raise their temperature to a lighter color to reflect light and heat. Don't think for a moment that you've been excluded from this divinely creative conspiracy. We humans have a God-given ability to adapt and respond to our environments. When we are young, this is in fact a primary way we learn, by mimicking the sounds and speech and patterns of behavior we see in older adults. As we grow older, can't it, though, become both a blessing and a challenge? That we can indeed change is a foundational tenet of faith, an affirmation of God's gracious work in us. Where it gets tough is in the challenges posed by pressures of culture to conform. Thanks to Pastor Debbie, I've become acquainted with Disney's Encanto and the confession of the character Louisa, who sings, "I'm the strong one, I'm not nervous, I'm tough as the crust of the earth is. I move mountains, I move churches, and I glow because I know what is my worth. I don't ask what the hard work is, got a rough, indestructible surface, diamonds and platinum, I find them, I flatten them. I take what I'm handed, I break what's demanded. But under the surface, I feel berserk as a tightrope walker in a 3-ring circus. Under the surface, was Hercules ever like, yo, don't want to fight Cerberus? Under the surface, I'm pretty sure I'm worthless if I can't be of service. A flaw or crack, the straw in the stack that breaks the camel's back. What breaks the camel's back? It's pressure like drip, drip, drip that'll never stop. Whoa, pressure that'll tip, tip, tip till you just go pop. Whoa, oh, oh. Do you know the feeling of pressure? Whether under the surface or right out in the open. Our track record as Christians admittedly hasn't always been stellar. I don't know who made the first observation, but it's historically true. In the first century in Israel, Christianity was a community of believers. Then Christianity moved to Greece and became a philosophy. Then it moved to Rome and became an institution. Then it moved to Europe and became a culture. Then here in America, it's become a business. In fact, it's safe to say, I've gotten more books about leadership in pastoral workshops than I have books on prayer. There is more than just a little pressure to conform our Christianity to the pressure of culture. Pressure that'll tip, tip, tip. Where it gets particularly pernicious is that fine line where we become pressured to become something we're not. And a real and present danger for Christians as we look into the next election cycle is the conflation of Christianity and nationalism, such that they are for many Christians indistinguishable. We don't have a clue where nationalism begins and Jesus, the Savior of the world, leaves off. Pressure that'll tip, tip, tip. It's subtle and it's insidious. And it gets intensely personal. Among those enduring memories I have of my parents is the memory of my mom who taught 4th grade in the Melville School District in South County. In the many evenings, Mom sat on the couch grading papers until she fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. And my dad, who was a high school principal at Limburg, I remember Dad coming home late at night from pressure-filled meetings with parents and administrators and the many bottles of Maalox he took for his ulcer. At one point, he was buying the stuff by the case. And this was before Sam's or Costco. And he was chugging through a bottle a day. You can't tell me it's easy being a teacher. And to use teachers as just one example, they face the difficulties of teaching in the context of a rapidly expanding body of knowledge. In my lifetime and many of yours, what we know and have to learn in order to be competent is many times over more than any generation ever had to learn. More to learn means more to teach. Moreover, teachers are asked to teach values in a way that respects a great diversity of beliefs. Because our families don't teach children values, we expect our schools to do it. Plus, we no longer live in a culture that's homogeneously white or Protestant or European in its heritage. In our schools, you'll find most of the known religions on earth or some variation of them. How do you respect the growing diversity of our culture and at the same time be true to yourself? Then there's the challenge that we ask our schools to provide what used to be provided in our families and churches and government. We ask our schools to be responsible for a child's diet and discipline, to be experts on the law and law enforcement, to know about drugs and the various forms of mental illness and disabilities. The sheer enormity of what we ask puts a lot of pressure on those whose calling is to educate. Do you who work in the schools feel it? Last but not least on my list, violence. I guarantee you that every single teacher and administrator has thought through a plan to keep their children safe and our children safe in the face of an active shooter. To be a teacher is to be vulnerable. You can't work at risk without feeling the underlying pressure that will tip. Whether teacher or banker or engineer or just average person trying to survive, we feel the pressure. In our text today, Paul says, verse 2, "Do not be conformed to this world." Do you like how the J.B. Phillips translation puts it? Don't let the world squeeze you into its own mold. Have you known the pressures to become something you're not? To move you off course from becoming the person you were called to be? All the voices of the world telling us who and what we should be and do and feel about ourselves. If you felt such pressure squeezing in on you so tightly that you can't breathe in whatever work or circumstance of your life, then Paul's next words offer hope. If you've known your share of Maalox nights, check it out. Be transformed, Paul says, by the renewing of your minds. Remolding, remaking. It's within God's work. It's a matter of cultivating a discipline of interiority. That's a discipline of interiority, not a discipline of inferiority. It's a contemplative life that is deeper and richer than the circumstances surrounding us. It's about nurturing a power and identity that's not drawn from the world. It's the development of a spiritual life and of the sensitivity and courage to listen to the voices within. It's an autonomy that is necessary for authenticity. Or as one of my teachers put it, we've got to be a self before we can risk that self in the world. Henri Nouwen was a Roman Catholic contemplative. He said, sometimes one wonders if the fact that so many people ask support, advice, and counsel from so many other people is not in large part due to their having lost contact with their innermost self. What's inside? And in faith, it's who's inside. Changing gears, I understand that the Irish have a unique way of talking about emotion. Here's our lesson for today in speaking Gaelic. You don't say, I am sad. You say, sadness is on me. In Gaelic, Tabron Orum. Don't you love that? Because there's an implication of not identifying ourselves with any emotion fully. I am not how I'm feeling in this moment. And I don't need to respond to this momentary feeling. I am not sad. It's just that sadness is on me for a while. Something else will be on me for another time. And that's a good thing to recognize and own. By extension, the pressures of this world are on us, unavoidably so. Pressure that'll tip, tip. But they are not in us, nor must they define us. We are in the world, but we are not of this world. Be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And the divinely creative conspiracy continues.